I think Masvidal's GSP level?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I think if Masvidal was around during that time, he would be dangerous for everybody. I think.
Hey gang, welcome back. So I found the Spotify episode where Joe Rogan had said that Jorge Masvidal had beaten better fighters than George St. Pierre, and that Kamaru Usman had faced higher quality opponents and generally was a better fighter. And I read these news articles online. I thought at first they were clickbait because I couldn't find anything on YouTube, any clips of him actually saying it. But luckily for you, I went through the 3 hours of the Luke Combs Country Singer podcast and was able to find this clip for you. So let's play the clip, and then we're going to break down how insane and idiotic this take is, and I'm challenged to debate Joe Rogan on that any day. So here we go.
That fight, Leon Edwards and Kamaru Usman, that's for legacy. I mean, Usman is, in my mind, up until that fight, is the greatest welterweight of all time. And Leon Edwards lands that one hit.
You're going over GSP.
Yeah. I think if they fought,
that crushes me.
I just think the level of competition he faces higher.
You think so?
Yeah, but it's just because GSP was so good, he raised the bar.
He raised it to the level it's at now.
Yes.
Right.
But I think if you look at GSP's victories, I mean, he beat some very good guys. But I think the guys Kamaru Usman beat, Colby Covington, Jorge Masvidal, Tyron Woodley, I think they're better.
I think Masvidal's GSP level?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I think if Masvidal was around during that time, he would be dangerous for everybody. I think he's on another level. But I think everyone's on another level now. I think, look, the Masvidal that knocked out Ben Askren, that was one of the craftiest fucking moves everyone's ever done.
For sure, man.
He went sideways and then ran straight at him, and Askren's instincts kicked in, and he kneed him into the dark lands.
Oh, man.
Just one shot, boom, into the shadow realm.
Yeah.
I mean, Masvidal, he knocked out Eve Edwards with a fucking head kick back in the day.
He's a killer, dude, no doubt.
He's a fucking assassin.
He's a killer, dude, no doubt.
He's an assassin. He had bare knuckle fights in the Kimbo Slice days.
The Kimbo Slice era, dude. The YouTube video area.
Masvidal's a gangster.
And watching those later, so the last fight GSP lost, right? That's Sarah, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he lost Sarah and then avenges the Sarah.
He should have lost to Johnny Hendricks in a lot of people's eyes.
You think so?
Yeah, before he retired. A lot of people thought that was not a just decision. I'd have to go back and rewatch it to see if I agree. But, it was like the amount of fights that he had, the stress behind. Now, don't get me wrong. He's absolutely one of the all-time greats.
Yeah.
One of the all-time greats. I'm not looking at it like saying, he wasn't as good as Kamaru Usman. I'm saying what he did was not as impressive as what Usman did.
If you look at competition.
Yes. If you look at the fact that, he got armbarred by Matt Hughes when Matt was in his prime. Yeah. He got knocked out by Matt Serra. And those are Matt Serra was a murderous puncher. And he took that guy for granted, and Matt fucking caught him, and Matt could do that to anybody. And then eventually they had a rematch, and he beat Matt up in front of the fans in Canada, and it was an insane event. He's an all-time great. I love him to death. But I feel like if I look at the level of competition he faced and the level of competition Kamaru faced and what Kamaru did to those people, you got to understand, Kamaru, when he was coming up, no one would speak his name.
Me and Marty sit next to each other? Marty, do you know me? Yes.
Yeah. How do you know me?
I know you because we used to hang out. We used to hang out at the training center.
Be quiet.
Okay.
You don't know me.
I offered to fight you. I mean, there's not much more you can say there.
Hey, be quiet.
So let's address some of those points by Joe Rogan, and we'll kind of go through them. So the first thing I want to address is Kamaru Usman faced better people during his championship reign than George St. Pierre. So let's take a quick look at Kamaru Usman's record. All right, so here we go. So Kamaru Usman won the UFC welterweight championship on March 2nd, 2019 against Tyron Woodley. This was right at the beginning of Tyron Woodley's downslide. So how did Tyron Woodley do after losing to Kamaru Usman? Well, he lost his four last fights. He lost to Gilbert Burns, he lost to Colby Covington, he lost to Vicente Luque, he lost in dominant fashion by all four of them. And then who did he lose to after that in 2 boxing matches? Jake Paul. So to say that Kamaru Usman fought better people, well, right away, and using Tyron Woodley as one of those examples is not particularly a great example. So let's move on to the second one. So he defended the welterweight championship, of course, against Colby Covington, and that was a competitive fight. That was a good fight. Some argued that had it went to a decision, Colby could have won the fight. Nevertheless, it was a good fight. Then he fought Jorge Masvidal. Now, I didn't think Jorge Masvidal deserved the title shot. Let's take a look at his record. So who did Jorge Masvidal beat to get the title shot? Well, in 2017, he lost to Damian Maia. In 2017, again, he lost to Stephen Thompson. He beat Darren Till, who's no longer in the UFC. He beat Ben Askren, who obviously, given his age and his hip replacement surgery, wasn't UFC caliber at the time. And he beat Nate Diaz. He beat Nate Diaz for a title shot. Like, I like Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz is a dog, but when you look at his record, you know, you get Kobe joking that these guys are 50-50 fighters. Well, there's no one who's more of a 50-50 fighter than Nate Diaz. He did not deserve a title shot from beating Nate Diaz. There were other people there for sure. So he gets a title shot, he loses by decision, clear decision, and then gets an immediate rematch. Or I think actually Kamaru had to fight someone to get the rematch with Jorge. Yes, Kamaru fights Gilbert Burns. Gilbert Burns is a beast. He's more of a 155er in my opinion, but he's a total beast. Beats Gilbert Burns decisively, but he's a small welterweight. Let's not make a mistake. Then he fights Jorge Masvidal again. Again, Jorge Masvidal. And what does Jorge Masvidal do to earn the rematch after getting like 50-40 forward? Nothing. Nothing at all. Jorge does not deserve the rematch. Then he beats Colby Covington again by decision, a close decision. Not as close as the first one, even the first one ended in TKO. And then who does Leon Edwards fight? Who does Leon Edwards fight to get a title shot? Nate Diaz. Now let's go to Georges St-Pierre. So Georges St-Pierre wins the welterweight title against Matt Hughes, arguably one of the best of all time. Loses to Matt Serra in his first title defense. What does he do? Does he wait for a rematch like everybody else does? No. He beats Josh Koscheck decisively, using wrestling too, and his jab. Then he decisively beats Matt Hughes again, gets the interim title shot, then finally gets to Matt Serra. So fights two people on the road back to the title, destroys Matt Serra in the second round. Then he beats John Fitch, who was on like a crazy, incredible win streak at the time. What was his? Yes, look at this win streak that John Fitch was on. This is not a Nate Diaz record. This is not a Jorge Masvidal record. Then he beats BJ Penn. Then he beats Thiago Alves. Thiago Alves was on a tear. He beats Dan Hardy, who was on a tear. He beats Josh Koscheck again. Look at who Josh Koscheck beat to get the title shot of Georges St-Pierre. Paul Daly and Anthony Johnson. Remember Anthony Johnson used to fight at 170? He beats Jake Shields. The grappling of Jake Shields is so underrated. And Jake Shields had come over from Strikeforce after beating, look at who Jake Shields was beating. Yushin Okami, Carlos Condit, Nick Thompson, Paul Daly, Robbie Lawler, Jason Miller, Dan Henderson he beat. Martin Kampman loses to Georges St-Pierre. Then Carlos Condit was on a huge tear at the time, beats Carlos Condit by decision, beats Nick Diaz by decision, beats Johnny Hendricks. If you watch the fight again and you're looking at a 10-9 system with 5 rounds, I scored it for George St. Pierre. Watch it again without the bias and the talking. And of course, we all know that Johnny Hendricks was on the sauce. Like, let's not lie about that. Most likely, allegedly. Then he comes back in 2017. 4 years later, and wins the middleweight championship against Michael Bisping, who's a tough dude. And you're saying that all that is nothing compared to Kamaru Usman. It's not even. And it's not only is it nothing compared to Kamaru Usman, it's nothing compared to Jorge Masvidal. Let's take a look at Jorge Masvidal. So we'll go back here. So he beats Ross Pearson by decision. He beats Jake Ellenberger. He beats Donald Cerrone. Then he loses to Damian Maia. He loses to Stephen Thompson. He beats Darren Till. Darren Till's no longer in the UFC. He beats Ben Askren. Ben Askren had hip injuries and all that kind of stuff and came to the UFC too late. Then he beats Nate Diaz, classic, for a title shot. Loses to Kamaru twice. Loses super decisively to all 3 of them. And but he's fought better people. Let's look who else he's lost to. He's lost to Lawrence Larkin, Benson Henderson, Al LaQuinta, Rustam Khabilov, Gilbert Melendez, Paul Daly. Well, how many of those people that George beat Paul Daly, especially back around then too? Now, I'm not saying that Kamaru Usman, Tyron Woodley, or Jorge Masvidal aren't great. They're awesome fighters, and I'm actually a big fan of Jorge Masvidal. I'm a fan of Colby Covington too, though, so I go back and forth on that, but I wanted Colby to win in their last fight, and I want him to win against Leon Edwards. Leon Edwards talking about how Kobe doesn't deserve a title shot. Hey, Leon, who did you fight to get a title shot? You fought Nate Diaz after he lost to Jorge Masvidal. Anyways, I think that these guys are all great fighters, but to say that they have better records and fought better people than George St. Pierre did is one of the most insanely idiotic statements I've ever heard.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
So Joe has to be called out for saying that, and I like how Luke Combs, the country singer, was like, really? Because really, are you fucking out of your mind, Joe? And he must have been doing drugs or something. Who knows? The guy, but it was a bad take, and I think even announcers, even fighters. I did a video before on DC's bad take. He thought that Alex Volkanovski had no chance against Islam Makhachev, and I did a video saying that's a terrible take. He said it would be the biggest upset in the world if Volkanovski won. Just because you're a fighter doesn't necessarily mean that everything you say is going to be smart or intelligent. I love having the fighter perspective, that color commentator perspective. And I love having these commentators, these fans of the sport that have been watching forever, like Joe Rogan. But just because they're fighters, or because they're commentators, or because they've been around for a long time, or because they're celebrities, doesn't mean they know what the fuck they're talking about all the time. And this is obviously a case of recency bias, which is huge in fighting. Anytime anybody wins, they're the best fighter in the world. Every UFC pay-per-view is the best card they've ever had. And people fall into this recency bias thing all the time, and Joe Rogan is really bad for that at times. So I had to make this video calling him out because it was just whack. Georges St. Pierre is the best welterweight of all time, hands down, no question. Anyways, thanks again for watching this video. If you agree with what I have to say, make sure you hit that like button, comment, and subscribe.